Hey there, welcome to our AP Legal Zone podcast, brought to you by AP Lawyers. We are your top fix for all weekly law updates, including family, immigration, wills, and estates law. Just a friendly reminder, we are not your lawyers, and everything contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be construed as legal advice. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about our new episodes. Hi everyone, my name is Shireen Abdi and I'm with Angela Princeville, and today we're going to be talking about cohabitation agreements. So, Angela, what is a cohabitation agreement?
So a cohabitation agreement is between two people who are not married to each other and who want to enter into an agreement on how their rights or what their respective rights and obligations would be during their cohabitation and in the event that they separate or a person dies, I guess. So some things that you can include in your cohabitation agreement are, how you want to deal with property, your rights and your obligations to your respective properties. You want to talk about support. If you have children, you could talk about the moral training of your children and their education, as well as any other matter. Quite frankly, it's free reign for you at this point. You're not confined by the law. You can draft your agreement, subject to a couple of caveats that we're going to talk about pretty much. So, I just want to drop this here. Many people think it's a strategy to avoid to live together and not get married to avoid the legal obligation that comes with marriage.
Or they don't know that there's going to be a legal obligation arising out of their cohabitation.
Yeah, so they think we're not married, and so
And I don't know.
I don't owe her anything. I don't owe him anything.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Even if you keep everything separate, I promise you, it still doesn't work that way.
Yes.
And I think that's a common thing. I've even had people that are married that tell me we all our bank accounts are separate, and I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. But that's fine. And in this case, it may also not matter.
And I mean, I know it's unfortunate, quite frankly, and I don't know how. I mean, I shouldn't say I don't know how. I understand why the law around trusts and things like that exist and why, it's necessary, because sometimes it really is unfair to not divide properties, for example, or not make sure that those support obligations exist. I understand why it's done, but it's almost like aside from the automatic right of married people to equalization, common law spouses can just make a trust claim and then they get equalization. You know what I mean? So it's almost
and it also doesn't stop you from getting spousal support. So spousal support is not something that only married people get. And if that's what you construe it as, then I'm sorry to break it to you.
No, the number of times when people are done with a separation and they're leaving our office and they always tell me, I'll never get married again. And it's always like, no, wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm like,
don't tell me that. Yeah. Once you meet somebody and you like them, and again, I'm just going to throw this out there again. Cohabitation in Ontario doesn't just mean living in the same home. Okay, so if you're in some sort of long-term relationship, newsflash, just talk to a lawyer, because don't think she's going to stay, as Shireen said, we'll keep our things separate. She stays in her house, I stay in my house, and there's no legal obligation.
Yeah.
It doesn't work
out that way. I actually had a client who lived in an apartment building. He lived in one apartment building, and then down the hall, she lived in the next rental unit. But they were still perceived to be a cohabitating partnership. And it's very interesting because obviously, like, they kept separate residence, but that's the thing that we're trying to make you very wary of. It doesn't, although it may seem for all intents and purposes that you guys are not intended to divide your property or whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean that there's no obligation that could arise. So you definitely want to protect yourself. Yes. So yeah, thank you for bringing that out, because I think that's a very common problem. Is don't think that you're just because you're not trying to get married don't believe in marriage, that there's no automatic like
Legal obligations.
yeah.
It might not be as automatic as
Yeah.
people that have actually married, but
It
they
might be
exist.
annoying if you're the person trying to get something, but it's also very it can also be very costly for the person trying to defend their rights to certain property and things like that. So be very careful.
Yeah. So with cohabitation agreements, I had said there's certain things that much as you have free reign to modify your rights and exclude properties and support and things like that, when it comes to your children, you cannot include parenting terms. So you guys can't agree to joint custody ahead of time and things like that. You can't do that. You can only agree to things like, we're going to bring them up in the Catholic faith, for example, something like that.
Like
and
moral training.
Even that is still subject to the best interest of the child.
Even that, let's say, at the time of separation, maybe your child is like 13 years old and they don't want to be Catholic and things like, again, it's the best interest of the children that's going to be paramount. It's going to reflect what that looks like for the children.
So when you're drafting that cohabitation agreement, you could include any number of things, right? So when you're talking about property, you may be wondering, well, what do I do here? Well, if your intention is to keep your property because you're not married to this person and you don't believe you owe them that obligation, then we'll just say in the cohabitation agreement that you keep your property. It might seem to you like it's the sensible thing to do, like it's not her property, it's in your name. How the hell does she get anything? But think about this. If she's helping you pay that mortgage,
if she's
doing
property,
even the gardening, some people are so good that because somebody could say, well, she didn't contribute any cash, but some people are so good with their hands that they can they could transform that $1 million house into $1.5 billion house by giving you that stellar garden in the neighborhood, by fixing things
or that domestic labor, like that domestic responsibility, keeping and maintaining that home, like that might be enough to give someone, a trust claim against that property. So you want to be careful.
So that's where in your cohabitation agreement, you would make it clear that, and it could be, well, we're buying one property together and then, that's it. My investment properties are mine to keep. Things like that, your accounts, whatever it is that you want to keep for yourself, then you do that. And if it turns out that you actually want to just divide all of your properties because you guys want to have this long-term relationship. I actually had someone that said, well, they had a home joint and they were starting a business together, and he part of the girlfriend's condition was she wanted to make sure that she would benefit from the business. He actually wanted her to benefit because he felt she would make good contribution to the growth of the business. And we can see that in the cohabitation agreement. It was important to do that because she's not entitled to the business. Like, it was a professional business. So he couldn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm not really sure how that works from a corporate law perspective, but his position was he couldn't add her as a director, which could have been an easier way to do it. But regardless, they chose to do that. That was their reason. That was their why for doing a cohabitation agreement. And I think it makes sense. So God forbid they break up in the future, they already showed the intent to split things in a certain way, right?
Yeah, you might even have maybe put the other person as a joint owner, but maybe just even to qualify for a mortgage. And you may be dating, but your intention was like, she knows it's mine, she didn't contribute. Trust me when I tell you, you want a separate document to outline that.
We actually remember the case we had where it was hundreds of thousands of dollars in a down payment and they put their names as joint. Relationship lasted 3 years. Well, if you go by title alone, she's entitled to half. So if you put down $500,000 and that home, most people, the average person doesn't think that after a 3-year relationship, somebody should walk away with $250,000 and more because the property had increased in value when they didn't pay the mortgage at all. There was no children between them.
No
there was nothing
provided by them. Yeah. There was nothing to.
But he just did that for what our client's understanding was just, well, we're together. I just wanted her to feel like, included. And we're like, do you
There's
understand?
other ways to feel included. You don't need to be
Yeah.
included on, I guess, a parcel register. Like no
Yeah.
one's gonna see
But
that. But I guess
that was his intent.
but yeah, it's nice.
He didn't understand the consequences. So if he had a separate agreement and it was important to them to show that they have something together, then that's fine. And I know also from an immigration perspective, when people want to sponsor someone, it's to show that the relationship is a genuine one and things like that. They usually would provide documentation to the immigration authorities showing things that they have jointly. So obviously, if you have a home together jointly, that's something that would be helpful in that context. So usually, the parties need to sign in that context. It makes sense to sign a cohabitation agreement saying, regardless of what title says, X owns the property, and then that's fine. So you can include him or her. You can do whatever you want to do for immigration purposes without necessarily incurring that huge liability that you weren't intending to.
Exactly.
Okay, so spousal support. I know you had mentioned that earlier as well. Like, that's the fact that you're not married and she has a job and she's always had a job and you kept your account separate, and all of that's not going to
Sometimes,
fly.
especially if like maybe, I think sometimes people will think, okay, well I supported her the entire time, and I'm like, that doesn't help.
That
you.
makes it even
That
worse.
makes it worse because now you've intended and more you. It's
You've
helped
created a pattern of dependency.
Yeah.
Now she's dependent on that standard of living.
Exactly.
And so you're not
you
just
took-
going to
yeah.
walk away from that. You have to now maintain her at this new level that you've taken her to. So yeah.
If you're accustomed to this high rise lifestyle and you're taking, thousands and thousands of dollars of vacation a year and you're living lavishly, that's creating a standard of living
you can't
that
just cut
you would
it off
have
when
to
you leave
upkeep.
her.
Exactly. And you mean, depending on the length of your relationship, that also will determine how long support is paid. So you want to be careful. Essentially, it doesn't erase
And that's
your
why you
support
need
obligation.
to that's why you need to draft that cohabitation agreement. So I always tell my clients, like, I don't care, you're going to find love again, and I pray that you find love again, but don't tell me you're not going to get married, because it's not that easy. It's actually, trust claims for common law spouses is actually more complex than dealing with equalization claims between married people. So you're just going to create more of a mess. Like,
that's exactly.
create an agreement. If you want to marry them, create a marriage contract. If you don't want to marry them, create a cohabitation agreement. Another misconception I've noticed, sorry, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
No, go ahead.
So a misconception I've noticed people would have is, well, we intend to get married. When we get married, I'll do a marriage contract. So don't worry. We're not going to ask you to pay us twice, okay? Your cohabitation agreement becomes a marriage contract once.
That's actually what I was going to add. Yeah, so you read my mind. And that's actually very interesting. So it's worthwhile for you to have a cohabitation agreement, even in the event that you want to get married, but even in the event that you don't. It's very critical.
Yeah, and if she has a job and you have your job and you just want to introduce him to this new lifestyle, but you want to make sure that you're not funding that lifestyle for him after the relationship,
or you're not going to.
There's only one way to do it, not by arguing, not by telling the courts that, he didn't work and I did all of this for him, why should I continue? None of that's going to help you. The cohabitation agreement is the only thing that can actually help you. So I think it's extremely critical. Frankly, I think it's even more important to get a cohabitation agreement than a marriage contract.
I actually was going to say that as well, because it's a lot more difficult to deal with trust claims than it is with marriages.
People
because
have
at least
misconceptions. Yeah, at least, exactly.
At least you
with
know
marriage,
what you're getting into
know.
sometimes. Well, we imagine that at least for the most part, we find that you know what you're getting into.
What I find sadder is, like, people actually decide, and I say this from the experience of my clients that are usually leaving my office after I finalize their divorce or something, saying, I'm not going to get married. They're actually going into common law relationships thinking that they're going to avoid all of the mess. And I have to educate them and say, no, you're actually going, if anything happens, you're going to come back with a bigger mess than what we've just gone through. So please just do that cohabitation agreement and then forget about it. Go ahead and live happily ever after. why I also like agreements like that is, and even with marriage contracts and things, I feel like sometimes, not I feel like, I know sometimes when married or common law spouses are in having arguments, many times one party, the party with more to lose financially, can't even have that discussion freely or openly because they're so scared of the obligations. You've seen it in your practice. How many times have people come to us only to separate 5 years later?
Yeah.
Because when they talk to us and we tell them it's a bad, the relationship is so bad. They've spent the first hour telling us everything wrong about this relationship. And then when we have that conversation with them about their legal obligations, we don't see them anymore. And I get it because it's huge. They can't even, they can't even fathom like going through with things. Why would you want to live that way? And the problem is most people I actually had a client came back to me 5 years later, and it was nothing but regret because all of the obligations I told him he had 5 years prior had pretty much doubled. Income had doubled. Mortgage was now paid off. What else? They were like, so yes, wife had gone, I'm sorry, girlfriend had gone longer without, working and all of that. Trust claim is now more solid because we've gone from a 10-year relationship to a 15 years and counting relationship. So it was worse all through. And I said, if you had, I did advise that at that time. I'm like, you can do this cohabitation agreement right now. And if he had done that, you could easily and honestly work on your relationship without worrying about the financial consequences.
You could have a better sleep. Like, who wouldn't want that?
Yeah.
And I can promise you, our clients, after they go through a separation, they know when they're getting into a relationship to come back and get a cohabitation agreement.
Yes.
Because they know the importance of it now. And had they had wished, I guess, that, they had come to us sooner, had known, I'm sure things would end up differently. And the one thing I think we didn't mention was child support obligations for your significant other's children.
Yes.
You definitely don't want to be paying child support. I mean, you may, from a personal or moral obligation, want to, but you don't want that obligation from a legal perspective that you have to support your significant other's children. So if you have children, if they have children, you have children coming into the relationship, and the other party doesn't want that obligation, you can actually waive that obligation in the agreement. So it's worthwhile to have one.
Yeah, that's a very good point to remember too. Yeah, because otherwise you have a legal obligation, right? Okay, so the last area I want us to touch on is sort of just signing that agreement, creating an agreement between yourselves and signing it versus having a lawyer draft it for you. Well, not to be biased, but please get a lawyer to sign it. Preferably,
or at least review it. At least review it. At least to let you know what you're signing makes sense.
Yes.
It encompasses the wishes and the obligations that you actually want. And yeah, just
because sometimes people draft contradictory terms without understanding that they're drafting contradictory terms, or they would get templates that are from maybe U.S. companies and things that are. And I see clauses that are not enforceable in Ontario. And so
99% of the time, we suggest that we just draft a brand new one that encompasses what you
many
actually
times
want.
the people actually suggest it to me, because by the time I give them the changes that need to be done for it to make sense, it really just makes sense for them to have us draft it. So you want this agreement for your peace of mind. It's worth it to just get it done.
100% it's worth it.
Yeah. Make sure once we have it drafted, part of it's not done there. We have to make sure that it's properly signed and it's witnessed. We make sure that the other party gets independent legal advice.
Or at least has an opportunity to do so.
And declines. Yeah, we don't like when people do that. We prefer for you to get independent legal advice. But there's certain circumstances where we really don't care. And then lastly, and wait, I want to go back to that one. There's very few circumstances where we don't care about independent legal advice. Very few.
Yeah.
And honestly, actually, it's probably only one. That's usually when the other side, the person that's not getting independent legal advice, is the one that has a better deal.
Yeah. The one that has really nothing. Like
that has, so if my client's the one that's waiving all of the property and whatnot, and the other side is getting the benefit of keeping all of their property and everything. In those circumstances, I might not be as particular, but if it is reversed, I will insist, because it's not worth it if they sign. Sometimes just that lack of independent legal advice could be grounds to set it aside. Disclosure, it's important again for you guys to disclose what you each own as of the date of the contract to each other, so that both of you can make informed decisions about support and property. And then just make sure that you do not put undue pressure and duress on the other party to sign the agreement.
Yeah, forcing someone to sign the agreement, it doesn't help you.
Blackmailing them into do it doesn't help either. So they want to make an informed decision. They want to agree with you. It might not be conflict free, and that's why both have lawyers. You talk about the terms. It's okay. Which is why I also discourage people doing it themselves. It's better for you to use the lawyers as buffers. Let's have those difficult conversations and let's get this done, and you can take your agreement and you guys can go live happily ever after. So that's all I have for today on the topic of cohabitation agreement. Shireen?
That is all we have. Thank you so much for listening, and join us for our next episodes.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks for listening and joining us in the AP Legal Zone. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find more episodes by searching AP Legal Zone on anywhere you watch podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast today so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about any new episodes.